What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
What's going on, guys? It's Thanksgiving Cashing Points. I'm here with Scott Barrett and Ryan Heath to discuss the three-game slate ahead of the holiday. Scott, what are you thankful for before we get into the games here?
I'm thankful for you, Jake. I thought you did an incredible job with the Thanksgiving slate breakdown. I thought it was flawless, remarkable. So really good job, Jake. Really proud of you.
I appreciate that. That is actually live on the site now, so you can go check that out over at fantasypoints.com. Ryan, what are you thankful for ahead of the holiday?
Damn, I was going to say the same thing, that I was thankful for you and how you completely just crushed the Thanksgiving research so that I could focus on the main slate, which I'm very excited for. But yeah, thankful for you, thankful for fantasy points, thankful for how we're going to win some money on this Thanksgiving.
Yeah, this isn't a great way to lead off the show, but like just on a personal level, I've always lost money on the Thanksgiving slate. I don't remember the last time I wasn't dead by appetizers. But the Sunday afterwards is historically like one of my most profitable slates. Always crush it. Everyone still, they're spending time with family. They're hungover from lots of tryptophan and alcohol. And then that's my time to shine. So we have that to look forward to, but I'm looking at this slate and I'm looking at your analysis. This looks like the funnest Thanksgiving slate I can remember. And like, I see a serious edge here on quite a few number of players.
Yeah, this is a very fun slate. I will say that I think this is the best quarterback slate we've had on Thanksgiving, at least since I've been playing DFS seriously. This is a very, very good quarterback slate. Before we get into the games themselves, just wanted to have a couple notes that really just apply to this three-game slate. These play a lot differently than like the 8, 9, 10, 11 game slates that we're used to on a main slate. Obviously very okay to roster like some of these relatively gross names, guys like John Fitzpatrick, Brock Wright, some of these wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4s that you would never play on a normal main slate. Very viable on a three-game slate. We'll talk more about those guys shortly. Obviously, late swap is very, very important. This is probably the single softest slate of the year in terms of late swap because so many people spend the second game drinking, eating, and then falling asleep before the final game. So if you do have a computer near you and you can take a little bit of time away from family to adjust your lineups if you've fallen behind, that's always a huge edge. And then, on these three-game slates, because the contests are so huge, a lot of the most highly projected lineups do risk being duplicated in some capacity. So you have to consider some of the levers that you can pull to reduce your chances at, duplicates or very similar lineups. Something like extreme onslaught stacks, 4+ players from a single team. We can obviously leave salary on the table. I generally feel comfortable leaving 1,000, maybe up to 1,500 of salary on the table on this slate. You can even do a little bit more for the $5 milli, which is 600,000 entries this week. Also, uncommon player combinations are another great way to do this. 2 running backs from the same team, something like Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, or potentially like a Bengals stack against the Ravens defense are all good examples of sort of counterintuitive ways that you can reduce the chances that your lineup is duplicated. With all that out of the way, let's get into the games. Slate always kicks off with the Detroit Lions playing at home against the Green Bay Packers. Packers 2.5-point underdogs here. Total is 48.5, actually our lowest total game of the Thanksgiving slate. No Jaden Reed. Matthew Golden is questionable. Looks like Dontavian Wicks is also questionable. I am expecting Wicks to play here. Golden seems a bit more up in the air. Khalif Raymond looks very unlikely to play. And then Isaac Tesla, also questionable. I think Tesla likely goes. All right, Ryan, we're talking Packers. That means I have to throw it over to you, especially given how well Christian Watson is projecting for us. This is shaping up as a pretty good matchup for Watson. And overall, I think things are looking pretty strong for the Packers wide receivers here, with or without Matthew Golden, right?
Yeah, this Thanksgiving slate was just made for me. Christian Watson is the best play on the slate. Like what? I dream of days like this. But yeah, he's an amazing play. He's one of our top projected values. The schematic matchup is just perfect with the Lions playing the highest rate of man coverage in the NFL. Watson is, aside from Wicks, really the Packers' only man beater. He ranks top 10 in yards per out run against man, and they're very vulnerable deep. Third most receiving yards per game allowed on the deep ball. And Watson actually ranks third in the NFL in catchable deep targets per game right now. That's behind only JSN and CeeDee Lamb. So yeah, I am just going to lock button Watson, being completely honest. Like, I think he's a way better play than like the Jameson Williams, the Xavier Worthies kind of guys, other like deep thready guys in his salary range. Like, I just want 100% Christian Watson exposure on a slate like this.
Yeah, and these other Packers wide receivers are pretty good values as well. It's going to be interesting to see if Matthew Golden plays or not. If Golden sits, Dontavian Wicks will be out there for a full-time route share. He actually earned more routes than Romeo Doubs last week. I know the schematic matchup isn't great for Doubs, but he's also pretty interesting here. Obviously, Watson is the best play, though. Scott, anything to add on these Packers wide receivers? I think all of these guys are pretty interesting to me. If Golden were to go, he would probably be the guy that I would be the least interested in. I'd still have some interest in Dontavian Wicks if I'm stacking up Jordan Love. Doubs and Watson should be out there for 70-80% of the routes regardless.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with that. It really feels like Christian Watson week. He's had at least 45 receiving yards in 5 of 5 games, despite starting the year off in a limited role. And now he's, we always complain about this offense, how it's a wide receiver rotation. Everyone had a cap route share, but without Tucker Kraft, with all these injuries, he's a full-time player. He looks like the focal point of the offense. 33% first read target share or better in back-to-back games. He looks really good. It's an ideal schematic. And so, yeah, that's for sure a major fantasy points lean on the week. And, as major Christian Watson truthers, how awesome would it be on Thanksgiving for him to go off, for him to be one of the players you had to have? The flip side of all this, though, of course, is it is a short slate. Is he going to be super chalky, Jake? What are you seeing with ownership?
Yeah, so my sort of read on these Packers wide receivers is that the default Packers double stack with Jordan Love is going to be obviously including Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs. I think those are going to be the guys that really draw the vast majority of sort of Packers pass catching ownership. I think probably see Watson 25 to 30%, Doubs in maybe the like 18 to 23, 24% range was my read. I think if I'm stacking up Jordan Love, and I do like Jordan Love a bit in this spot, this is the worst game environment of the slate. These are the league's 2 biggest run funnel defenses by pass rate over expectation allowed over the last month of the season. That said, Detroit has been very vulnerable to the deep ball. So I think that's an angle that you could use to play Jordan Love. Obviously, that would play into Christian Watson. But the way that I want to make my Jordan Love teams is really just overstacking and including one of like a Dontavian Wicks, one of a John Fitzpatrick, or even a Luke Musgrave, even Josh Jacobs. I think those are all ways you can make those Jordan Love teams a little bit different. And then you're really just hoping that you get that Christian Watson deep ball that sort of breaks this game open and forces both teams to maybe throw a little bit more than they're comfortable with. In terms of quarterback ownership here, we'll talk a little bit more about the Detroit side soon, but I think pretty clearly Love and Jared Goff will be the lowest owned quarterbacks of the slate. I'd expect both in the 8 to 12% range. I think Love will be a little bit higher owned than Goff. I consider Love a better play than Goff, but obviously they're both very viable. I mean, all the quarterbacks on this slate certainly viable. I'll talk tight ends really quick, and then we can discuss this backfield. Across the industry, Luke Musgrave is projecting a little bit better than John Fitzpatrick. What was interesting, though, was that Fitzpatrick's route share has increased every week since the Tucker Kraft injury, and he was way ahead of Luke Musgrave last week, 54% route share compared to 29% for Musgrave. The other thing that I find really interesting about this was after week 11, Matt LaFleur said, when asked about Luke Musgrave's reduced playing time, he was like, that's a mistake. We got to get Luke Musgrave out there for more routes, more snaps. And then week 12 came, Luke Musgrave actually played less. So My thought here is that they may have reviewed the film and realized John Fitzpatrick is actually just a better tight end than Luke Musgrave. My other thought here is that John Fitzpatrick is playing more in the red zone, and with either of these guys, this is a very strong tight end slate. We have the Ravens tight ends against Cincinnati. We have Travis Kelce. We have Mike Gesicki. No one's going to get to these Packers tight ends, and you really need the touchdowns with guys this cheap because the target share is not really going to be there for either one. Fitzpatrick's playing notably more in the red zone, so he would be my lean between the two. When it comes to this backfield here, Scott, I'm curious what you think of the return of Josh Jacobs. How does he stack up compared to some of these other running backs for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I have a great lean on this situation. I feel like if he's healthy enough to play, they're just going to go back to riding him as much as possible. But in this matchup, is this really the spot for a Josh Jacobs blow up week? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think the trickiest part about Jacobs is that they are underdogs here. That makes me want to lean in to Jordan Love a bit more. That said, I mean, this is a massive run funnel over the last month, as I already mentioned. Detroit's been vulnerable to man gap rushing concepts. Jacobs himself has been better on man gap stuff. Really, it's just, can Green Bay sort of sustain a lead or keep this game close enough that they can keep grinding it out with Jacobs? And I think the other difficult angle with a slate like this is that after Jahmyr Gibbs, after Derrick Henry, that sort of middle tier of running back, Javonte Williams, Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, are all pretty similar plays in terms of raw projection. So I think it largely depends on sort of what lineup you want to build, what story you want to tell. I do think Jacobs with the Packers defense is a pretty strong angle. Ryan, anything to add on backfield tight ends before we talk Lions?
First, I just want to say you are so sharp for the John Fitzpatrick stuff. Like, that's just so impressive to me that you're digging that deeply into it. Completely love that call. I hope he scores. I hope he goes off. With Jacobs, I would feel a little bit better in kind of a roundabout way, just with the Packers being slight underdogs. When Jacobs was getting taken off the field, kind of when he was injured earlier in the year, it was usually like once the Packers got up, they would just yank him and then Emmanuel Wilson would enter the game, right? So if this is going to be even like a closer game script, that to me says they're going to play him as much as possible. So I think he's pretty strong. I think he would be my favorite kind of like the Chase Brown, Javonte Williams tier. But I'm with you in that I'm more interested generally in just stacking the Packers passing game.
Yeah, I think that that certainly makes a lot of sense there. Is worth noting Jacobs has a slight positive correlation with Jordan Love, so certainly wouldn't mind. I mean, even if it was negative, on a 3-game slate, with how big some of these contests are, totally fine to play Jacobs and Jordan Love. Just hope Packers score all the points. Lions side of this game, start with Jared Goff in the passing attack, and then we can talk through these running backs. Lions are home favorites. Implied total only 25.75 points. That's the third highest on the slate. Packers, much like the Detroit defense, massive run funnel. None of that really suggests a ceiling game, but Goff as a home favorite has always been awesome. Scored over 27 DraftKings points in 27% of his games as a home favorite since 2022. I do want to lean a bit more into these Lions running backs, but I also think the way you play Goff on this slate is pretty simple. Pretty much, if you're just playing Goff, Amon-Ra, Jamison Williams, that's what everyone's going to play, so you need to figure out a way to get different elsewhere. That doesn't mean you have to play a guy like Brock Wright or a guy like Isaac Tesla, but those are the two guys, really the only other guys on Detroit who are going to run any routes. Both should be around 60% is what we have projected. But I like either, full Lions overstacks. You could play Goff, Montgomery, both the wide receivers, and a Brock Wright. But yeah, I just want people to be aware that if you're playing Goff with sort of those top two projected values, that's going to be very, very chalky, and you certainly need to get different elsewhere if you're playing any sort of mid-size, large field stuff. Scott, anything to add on Goff, like how we want to stack him up, Lions pass catchers?
Yeah, I think maybe it's different on a 3-game slate, but I was thinking as we were writing the everything report on Monday, I was kind of saying to myself, I just don't think I'm ever going to play Jamison Williams again because he's just constantly overowned. And you look at the numbers, that it's just very little to back it up. I think, he has these spike weeks and it sticks in your head, but it's not really like true slate breaking performances. And then you look at the first read target share, Amon-Ra St. Brown is top 3. Jameson Williams down to like wide receiver 58. I think there hasn't been a single game this year he's seen more than one catchable deep target. So I just think he's kind of overrated, even with Sam Laporta out. Like the optimal stack to me, this might just be like main slate brain, is, if I could only go with 2, is you got to get Gibbs in there, who, since Dan Campbell took over play calling duties, leads all players and targets per route run. Really insane Christian McCaffrey-esque usage for potentially the most talented running back in all of football. And so I don't know. I feel like that would be my lean, of course, in a 3-game slate where, a 20-point game from Jameson could really push you over the top. Things are different, but just, optimal in a vacuum. I don't know. Is Gibbs actually the number 2 receiver on this offense?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Ryan, I know you had a great stat on sort of how Gibbs fares against a very zone-heavy Packers team. For what it's worth, also, Amon-Ra, fantastic against zone. So it's a great matchup for him. We're really not worried about the volume with Amon-Ra. I mean, he's just a great play. But
is he a better play than Jamar Chase, though?
That's the tricky part. Right now, our numbers have, I believe Jamar Chase is the slightly better value, but I mean, it is very close. Yeah.
And then you have Rashee Rice right under, like, what is it? 2 to 300 separating him from Chase or Rashee Rice.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it is, if you want to pay up a wide receiver, you have a lot of great options. I think, with Joe Burrow back, Chase has the best ceiling there, but we are really just splitting hairs. Also better game environment for Chase. Bengals likely playing from behind. Ryan, though, what do you think of Gibbs, how we should be stacking up the Lions here? It's just tricky when it's so concentrated on such a thin slate. A lot of these Lions teams, I think, are going to look very, very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want Gibbs in any Goff lineups. I want Gibbs in most of my lineups generally, just with what his workload and his efficiency has been. But yeah, to the schematic point that you were bringing up, the Packers play zone at a top 5 rate. Since Dan Campbell started calling plays over the past 3 weeks, Gibbs is actually averaging just under a 23% target share against zone coverage. That's only just barely behind Amon-Ra. It's way ahead of Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams is actually down at below Brock Wright in terms of targets per out run against zone coverage this year. So fully with Scott on, I just have no interest in JMO. I think like my ideal Goff stack is going to be Gibbs, St. Brown, plus like one other ancillary Lions piece, a Brock Wright, a Isaac Tisla. What do you think about like the Gibbs plus David Montgomery in the same lineup stuff, Jake? Like Monty is definitely cheap enough. I wouldn't do that like with Goff probably, but we have seen them hit ceilings in games together if they just completely blow out the opponent. I don't know if that's just like the Galaxy Brain thing that everyone thinks is Galaxy Brain, but that actually everybody's doing is playing Gibbs and Monty together. But wanted to at least bring that idea up.
Yeah, no, I think that's a more than fine angle, especially if we get the sort of blowout script. That would be really strong. I'd probably prefer to do that with the Lions defense. Me and Chris actually looked at this morning when we were talking projections. In week 10 with Dan Campbell calling plays, Montgomery led the way in snaps while the team was leading. So there might just be, they played from behind every single snap last week, and obviously Gibbs' usage was insane, but there are still some angles for Montgomery. I also think, Gibbs is going to be right there as the most popular play of the slate. He projects incredibly well, and for great reason. I mean, our initial projection on Gibbs was actually 27 DK. We walked that back a little bit. But another angle here is fading Gibbs and just playing Montgomery. They're negatively correlated. Montgomery could steal the touchdowns. Obviously scary with how well Jahmyr Gibbs is playing and how good his usage has been. He's been at 20.2 expected fantasy points per game since Dan Campbell started calling plays, and he's hyper efficient. 20.2 expected fantasy points for Jahmyr Gibbs is like 25 expected fantasy points for a league average running back. It's just absolutely insane usage. So he's a fantastic play. He's a guy that I want on a ton of my teams. I wouldn't blame anybody for lock buttoning Jahmyr Gibbs, playing him on 70 or 80% of their teams. I guess Tesla was sort of the only other guy we need to talk through a little bit here. He is a little beat up, but he's going to be out there for 60% of the routes. The problem is he just isn't earning targets. Cheap enough at 3K, though, that all you really need is one, 30, 40-yard touchdown, and you're there. So him and Brock Wright are the two guys that you can mix into Goff stacks, excluding the running backs, that get you a little bit different. Ryan, I don't think there are any great schematic notes for Tesla just because the sample size is so low, right?
Yeah, no, I generally don't try to do schematic stats for guys that have run few. I think he's at like 80-ish routes on the season, somewhere around that. So yeah, I try not to get that deep into it because it can just change on one play.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got him for roughly a 60% route share this week. It's just, can he earn, a couple targets and actually make a play there? All right, I think that does it. We're not playing any of these.
Can we take a look at this game from a macro perspective?
Sure.
Sort of buried lead here is that, like I said, this is one of the most exciting Thanksgiving slates I can remember, where you look at the top over-unders of the week. The top three are all Thanksgiving slate. Like main slate is, a lot lower down on the list. But this Packers-Lions game is, 5 points behind Chiefs, Cowboys, 3 points behind Bengals, Ravens. So it doesn't look like the most impactful. And I'm just curious how you think this plays out. We know the Packers really love to just pound the rock, hide Jordan Love. But they are 2.5 point underdogs in this game. What if the Lions pull ahead? Are we a little worried about the Lions offense, which has kind of struggled for at least the first three quarters, these last two games against pretty poor defenses? If they pull ahead, are they going to force Jordan Love into the pass? And then, the Lions defense has struggled. Jameis Winston had nearly 400 yards last week. How do you think this game plays out? Do you agree that this is probably the least impactful of the three games?
Yeah, I would say, it's Vegas suggests it has the least upside of the three games just based on the total. I think, overall, if I am playing these quarterbacks and leaning into a shootout, I really want to do it with at least one of the guys who can score an 80-yard touchdown. So a Christian Watson, a Jameson Williams, a Jahmyr Gibbs. These are the guys who, in a couple drives, could make this a 14-0 game, and then all of a sudden the other team's saying okay, we really need to start throwing, because the default mode for both of these teams is they're going to be fine going back and forth, just sort of grinding it out on the ground. Like I said, huge run funnels here. Ryan, I'm curious if you see this any differently, but yeah, that's sort of something I'm being very conscious of when I'm hand building any lineups that revolve around this game. Is I really want a playmaker in here, because if Christian Watson doesn't get you a big play, if Jameson Williams doesn't get you a big play, Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't have any huge runs, all of a sudden we're talking about both these teams probably sitting at a 50-55% pass rate, and maybe this game going a little under the total, and that's not really going to win you much.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do think the median outcome of this game is the lowest. You would want the big playmakers in. I would introduce we saw the Lions offense kind of struggle against the Packers back in week 1. Obviously different play caller, all of that. But that was the game where they basically couldn't get anything going other than a million little checkdowns to Jahmyr Gibbs and to Sam Laporta. I think there's a possibility, that whichever team it is that's kind of grinding it out, most likely it's not the most explosive game of the slate. So, while I like Watson, I'm still going to play him in every lineup because he can do it by himself. It's not going to – it's more of I'm going to dabble in some Jordan Love, probably not going to have that much Jared Goff, going to have a ton of the Lions running backs.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is the way most people are going to play that. But yeah, if you do want to build lineups that revolve around this game, just something to keep in mind that we have a handful of guys who can really speed up the pace here. All right, let's move it on to the 4:30 game on this slate. Kansas City Chiefs at the Dallas Cowboys. Total is a slate high 52.5. Chiefs are 3.5 point favorites. Isaiah Pacheco is back. Otherwise, this is basically our cleanest game from an injury perspective. Let's start off with Patrick Mahomes. This is like the picture perfect spot for Mahomes. Single softest schedule adjusted matchup for any quarterback this week. Chiefs have a league leading pass rate over expectation. He's very clearly the best quarterback value of the slate from a median perspective. If you're playing any sort of cash games, I think you just have to go with Mahomes this week. Ryan, curious if you're seeing anything matchup wise on the Chiefs pass catchers. Obviously, we want to play Rashee Rice against a very zone-heavy Dallas Cowboys defense. What are you seeing here?
Yeah, the biggest thing here is, as you just said, the Cowboys have kind of returned to their zone-heavy ways over the last couple games after they've made some additions to this defense. They've been really trying to shut down the run, especially since Quinnen Williams came back. Teams generally have not had much success running the ball against them. So yeah, that's great. Patrick Mahomes is going to drop back a ton into all this zone coverage, and that's what he picks apart best. We see Rashee Rice ranking top 4 in target per out run, top 2 in yards per out run against zone this year. Similarly, Travis Kelce benefits a ton from zone coverage. Like 90% boost to his yards per out run against it, behind only 5 wide receivers overall this year in yards per out run against zone. So yeah, just like the default stack to me is Mahomes, Rice, Kelce. I'm assuming that is going to be by far the most popular, maybe the most popular double stack on the slate. So you can't stop thinking from there, but I do think that's a strong angle. It's a strong place to start building from. Maybe you introduce a Xavier Worthy into that, or maybe even a Tyquan Thornton, Scott's favorite deep threat in the NFL. The Cowboys have been vulnerable to the deep ball, most deep receiving yards per game allowed. So maybe adding one of those guys is a way to get different and just running with the triple stack there. But overall, it's just a very strong spot for the Chiefs passing game. That's how I would start attacking it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do like that triple stack angle with Xavier Worthy. I think that's one way to keep ownership down. Marquise Brown and Tyquan Thornton both earn some of those extra sort of deep shot targets that obviously the Cowboys are very vulnerable to, so you can mix those guys in. I think Marquise Brown and Tyquan are going to be basically unowned. Tyquan only has 4 targets over his last 4 games, but his ADOT's been 43.5 on those 4 targets. So they have made a point to sort of get him in the game, to chuck him a deep ball here and there. And, at only 3,000, that certainly makes him viable on a 3-game slate. I think I pretty much only would want him in Mahomes teams. Scott, I'm curious, how are you viewing Mahomes, these Chiefs pass catchers, in just an incredible matchup?
Yeah, he was the overall QB1 by fantasy points per game. He had something like 5 games in a row with 25 DraftKings fantasy points, and then this 3-game skid. And he came out and he said it was because teams are playing more man against him. They can't hit the deep ball, so teams are just going to keep playing more man. I think even if Dallas increases the rates of man this week, it's still going to be an extreme zone heavy matchup against one of the worst defenses in the league. You have to stack him up with Rashee. I think Travis Kelce makes a ton of sense as the double, but on a short slate like this, if one of the other guys hits, that could really move the needle. I just have a hard time trusting any of these, 4% target share guys.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. It is certainly difficult to trust those guys. I think another way that you can mix up Mahomes stacks and, really just hope the Chiefs score a ton of points is mix in one of these running backs, either Kareem Hunt or Isaiah Pacheco. If you're playing the huge Millie, maybe you could argue for Brashard Smith. Brashard Smith role is sort of like a Mecole Hardman, Kadarius Toney-esque, where, he's getting a couple design targets per game. They are playing him a bit more in the red zone, but it's super thin when Kareem Hunt is stealing the majority of inside the 10 work. And then, Pacheco, we have a slightly reduced workload relative to what he was doing before he got hurt, when he was at about 65% of snaps, but really wasn't getting much of anything inside the 10. I also think those are decent guys to mix in with Mahomes. Kareem Hunt plus like Chiefs D is another interesting angle. Just hope he steals a couple of touchdowns. And I do think maybe there's an angle there where Hunt plays a little bit more. He did actually hit the 100-yard bonus last week. He finally had an efficient rushing game. So maybe they're like, we can ease Pacheco in a bit. Ryan, do you have any other angles on these running backs? Like, every team sort of has a running back that I think people want to play except the Chiefs. It's very gross when we've got one guy who's probably going to get most of the snaps, another guy is going to get the design targets, and then another guy is going to get all the inside the 10 stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I wrote like an absolutely glowing blurb for Kareem Hunt in the Everything Report, like before we knew that Isaiah Pacheco was going to be playing. So yeah, if you want to lean into the idea of they just ease him in, they don't need him in this game. They certainly eased him in when he came back at the end of last season after that severe injury. He, if memory serves, hardly played in the first game or two that he was back. And yeah, we saw the Chiefs with their lowest P-row of the season last week, went for like 30 carries, 3.5 yards per carry. They just let Kareem Hunt grind it out. I don't think that's what they want to do against Dallas, but it is an angle. It is like if you're doing like a very chalky stack somewhere else, I really do like that Hunt plus Chiefs D kind of call, because yeah, he can absolutely just take everything at the goal line and post an optimal score at the running back position.
Yeah, my final note on these Chiefs running backs and why I do think the Chiefs will just be outrageously pass heavy, and this is part of what makes Mahomes such a great play and his pass catchers such great plays, is that there were 3 defensive tackles for Dallas who played more snaps than any of their edge rushers or linebackers against Philly. They've been really into these 5-man fronts. Jerry Jones has even said, like, we traded Micah Parsons in part because we want to stop the run, which is hilarious. They're sort of like, I was talking to Chris this morning and I said, they're kind of like the inverse Bills, where they're just daring teams to throw on them, and everyone's doing it and everyone's having a ton of success. And obviously you don't need to dare the Chiefs to throw. They're going to do it pretty much every play regardless. So yeah, if you're playing any sort of cash formats, Mahomes is where things start and end with you at quarterback. I guess the only other guy that we didn't really talk about was Juju. He's 3K. He's not really running many routes. He's not really earning many targets. He is playing a disproportionate amount in the red zone, but you look at red zone usage, it's all Rashee Rice. I mean, since Rice came back, he's been getting basically every single red zone target that the team has had. So pretty hard to justify Juju. I honestly think, if I'm playing like the huge Millie, I'd rather go with a guy like Tyquan Thornton and just hope Scott Barrett is right about him being the best deep threat on the Chiefs. Scott, do you have anything to add on Kansas City before we move it on?
I really don't.
All right. Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott is projecting to sort of be in like this middle tier of quarterback ownership. I think we see Mahomes easily as the most popular quarterback play of the slate, and then Lamar and Burrow, probably Dak in like a similar 15 to like 22-ish% range, probably closer to 15 for most of those guys. Ryan, curious what you think of Dak Prescott here. Not exactly the best matchup on paper, but I mean, he has 2 great wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, you never want to count Dak out. It's like kind of direct leverage on all the Mahomes ownership. The double stack is very easy. There's an easy triple that you can make with Jake Ferguson, or an easy way to get off of the default wide receiver double stack ownership with Jake Ferguson. So yeah, I like Dak Prescott quite a bit. Schematically, it's kind of interesting. The Chiefs are very variable every single week in what they do schematically. Like it can either be a bunch of single high, it can be a bunch of 2 high. On average, it's more 2 high. They play it at a top 5 rate. That is very, very bad for George Pickens' efficiency over this season, which is interesting just because in general, he's been so amazing. Top 3 in yards per out run against single high, but 1.7 against 2 high. CeeDee Lamb is pretty much the same against 2 high. Jake Ferguson benefits from 2 high. So if you do want to say, okay, the Chiefs are just going to play a bunch of 2 high, then Dak plus Lamb plus Jake Ferguson is a pretty interesting little double stack that in past weeks has been awesome, has projected insanely well. But even for a 3-game slate, I don't know that that's going to be like the most popular angle that people are getting to. So that's pretty interesting to me. Yeah, tough Chiefs defense overall, but very, very likely shootout. I never want to count out Dak. So that's like kind of my favorite way to play it.
Yeah, I think I really like that angle that you sort of just laid out, because my favorite angle overall for Dak Prescott is, like, obviously everyone's going to want to play him with his 2 star wide receivers, and I think that's more than fine. But mixing Jake Ferguson into these teams is probably going to get you to some very different builds. I'm not sure quite what ownership to expect on Ferguson, but I imagine we're probably going to get single digits here, just because Mark Andrews, Gesicki, Travis Kelce, Isaiah Likely all project so well. And in our stuff right now, even Brock Wright projects as a slightly better value than Jake Ferguson. Ferguson also has been second on the team in red zone targets, even since CeeDee Lamb returned and his volume kind of waned. So we could get a multi-touchdown game from a tight end who's, shown good upside in the past. He's a little expensive at 5,100, but everyone's price is a little reduced, so we can still make some great Jake Ferguson lineups. And I really think the ownership angle with Ferguson is quite strong, especially if you are leaning into Dak or even leaning into this game. I mean, you could probably make the most unique Mahomes team by just getting rid of Kelce, putting Jake Ferguson in there, and then sliding in some other Chiefs wide receivers. Scott, what do you think of these Cowboys pass catchers?
Yeah, I wrote a bunch of words on this in the Everything Report. If you look at it by volume, CeeDee Lamb is really out alphaing George Pickens. Pickens has only had a better target share in one of Lamb's healthy games this year. By XFP per game, Pickens is like wide receiver 11. CeeDee Lamb is wide receiver 1 with a comfortable margin ahead of Jamar Chase. But obviously the production is totally different. Since week 8, CeeDee Lamb is the least efficient wide receiver in fantasy. George Pickens is second most behind JSN. Pickens is incredible. And so what's going on wrong with CeeDee Lamb? It is, you could blame it on injury. Lisa Salters had a report a couple of weeks ago saying he's only just now getting back to 100%. He had some uncharacteristic drops these last 2 games. I really just think it's bad luck. He's had a league high 42 fantasy points negated due to penalty and DPIs. You had this Schottenheimer quote, which I can pull up, talking about how expect heavy target volume from CeeDee Lamb this week. They're just going to go right back to him. So I think it's close between these 2 guys. I think CeeDee Lamb is like one of the sneaky best values of the slate, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, CeeDee is a great play here, and I mean, Scott's right. Like, the volume for CeeDee has been incredible. He's been running laps around George Pickens in volume terms, but obviously Pickens has been playing incredibly well by efficiency. I know Scott had a tweet where, like, George Pickens is basically the most efficient wide receiver in almost every metric that matters, or top 5 at the very worst. He's just been playing out of his mind this year. But
here's the Schottenheimer quote on CeeDee Lamb coming off of drops in week 12. He's got that look in his eye. It's the same look he had after that first game in Philadelphia. Expect a lot of balls to go 88's way on Thursday.
Well, there you have it. I think we're probably all in some agreement that, like, a CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson stack is a really great way to get some leverage on Dak Prescott. There are also some ancillary guys that we could use, Ryan Flournoy and Kevontae Turpin. They've kind of been in, like, this frustrating committee. Neither guy has earned more than 45% of routes over the last couple of games. Turpin is sort of locked into more volume because he'll get some design stuff. He'll get some carries. I do think I prefer Flournoy, and I know the spring football analyst in me is sort of seething at this take, but Flournoy is the much bigger body. I mean, Turpin only weighs 160 pounds. Flournoy has been the clear lean inside the red zone, at least in terms of snaps. So I think he carries better touchdown equity. If you want, like, a super extreme angle for the 600,000 entry milli maker, you could maybe play like a Turpin plus Cowboys defense and hope for one or even multiple return touchdowns. But he is coming into this week with he was sick, had a shoulder injury, off the injury report now. But I do think this committee leans a bit more toward Flournoy, at least on the offensive side this week. Obviously, Turpin has juice as a returner. Scott, what do you think of your boy Javonte Williams this week? I think sort of as this middle tier of running back goes, at least right now, I imagine he'll probably be the lowest owned of the group. I imagine Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs maybe closer to 30%, and then Javonte closer to like 20-25% here. What do you think?
Yeah, I like him as a leverage play. I think you look at the numbers and you're like, maybe not the right spot. But what if Mahomes doesn't show up? He has really struggled these last 3 weeks. They do something to shut down Rashee and play more man. Quinnen Williams is getting inside pressure. And Dallas has a comfortable lead throughout and falls in the end zone twice, maybe hits the 100-yard bonus. So I just think he's a better play than ownership suggests, and he's a unique way to gain leverage on the highest over-under game of the slate.
Yeah, I do think that's a really interesting angle with everybody playing Mahomes. What if this game actually just plays a little bit grosser than we were all anticipating? What if Javonte gets fed? The volume's still there. The one thing I will say on Javonte is that target share has just totally fallen off a cliff since CeeDee Lamb came back. He's at 1.8 targets per game over his last 5. He's generally been really inefficient on his targets. So I think my favorite angle with Javonte, definitely pairing him with Cowboys defense, hoping this game plays a little slow. All right, let's move it on to the final game of the slate. Cincinnati Bengals at the Baltimore Ravens. Total is 51.5. Bengals are 7-point underdogs. No T. Higgins or Trey Hendrickson for Cincinnati. Samaje Perine is back. Of course, Joe Burrow is back. And then Justice Hill and Rashad Bateman, both questionable. Need to keep an eye on those two. Scott, this is the ultimate get-right spot for Lamar Jackson, but I also feel like we've said that 2 or 3 other times this year, and he just hasn't quite gotten right, averaging fewer fantasy points per game than Bo Nix and Jackson Dart. I mean, it's been a brutal year, but against the Cincinnati defense, Ravens' implied team total is massive. This is the spot finally for Lamar Jackson, right?
I think that's a good question. I think he's hurt. I think he's hurt, and I think a fully healthy Lamar Jackson is a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. He's a top 3 quarterback in fantasy, but a non-mobile, gimpy hamstring Lamar Jackson, might be a bottom 10 starting quarterback just because defenses can play him honestly. That's a big thing that makes Lamar Jackson is you have to account for him in the run game so he gets better looks in the passing game. And so if defenses can play him honestly, don't have to worry about the threat of the run. Is he like a bottom 10, bottom 12 pure pocket passer without any mobility? Maybe. I think that's a real thing to think about, but it's also just like a best possible matchup, and it's Lamar Jackson. And yeah, so I don't know. It's kind of tricky. I think it's, high risk, high reward spot here.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I think most of the field is going to lean into Derrick Henry, who leads all players over the last 5 weeks in carries per game and inside the 5 attempts per game. So touchdown equity is still there for Derrick Henry. He's been relatively efficient. And then obviously this is the single softest schedule adjusted matchup for opposing running backs. Bengals defense has been a total disaster for running backs. So I expect Henry to be right there with Gibbs as the most popular running back play of the slate. Both should be pushing for, close to 50% ownership, maybe even higher than that in like smaller fields, single entry type of stuff. But I think Henry's pretty straightforward in that regard. Ryan, let me ask you about Lamar. Do you have any interest here? I think it's just a tricky spot. He's been hurt all year, like Scott laid out. He's not running as much as he normally does. In this spot, if you told me the Bengals defense was terrible, which we all sort of anticipated, I would have told you in August, our Lamar projection for a game like this must be 24, maybe even 25 points. We're only at a 21.5 point Lamar Jackson projection. So I'm curious what you think on Lamar Ravens pass catchers here.
Yeah, that's kind of honestly like the best argument against Lamar is maybe how do you stack him? I think he's definitely the trickiest guy to stack on this slate. Zay Flowers like should be the go-to, and he has shown massive upside at times in DFS, at least especially if you look at last year. But he really has not like posted these major spike weeks since like is week 1 the last time he went over like 14 or 15 DraftKings points, something like that. It's been a while since we've gotten like the Zay Flowers blow up game. You've got DJ Turner playing really well. With the Bengals kind of shutting down all of these opposing wide receiver ones. So my clear favorite Bengals pass catcher is just going to be Mark Andrews. That is both from the perspective of we have multiple like 28 plus point performances by totally random tight ends against the Bengals this year with way worse usage than Andrews. We saw it from Hunter Henry last week. It could absolutely just be Andrews this week. They funnel everything underneath. Andrews with under an 8 average depth of target, where the Bengals are allowing the 3rd most receiving yards per game. So Andrews is like very clearly an awesome play to me. I would want him in any and all Lamar Jackson lineups. Also has been kind of the go-to guy in the red zone. So he's pretty clear to me, but I don't really know where else you go that you feel super great about. I think maybe it's just like Lamar and Andrews, and you hope Lamar runs in 1 or 2 touchdowns, and that's like how he gets there. But yeah, I unfortunately don't have other like compelling angles really.
Yeah, I mean, I think if Rashad Bateman plays, which at this point it looks like he's likely to, everyone across the industry has a projection for him at this point. Mixing some Bateman in there would be interesting. In his last 4 games, he was only at 3.3 targets per game, but he was tied for the team lead in red zone targets over that span. So there might be a little bit of touchdown juice. I know he's a big average separation score guy. So I don't necessarily mind mixing some Rashad Bateman in. I do think the most common way that people are going to play Lamar is with both tight ends or with one tight end plus Zay Flowers. So sort of getting away from that default build, I think, is something to keep your mind on. I also think just playing Lamar with Derrick Henry and saying the Ravens score so many points that these guys all get pulled in the 4th quarter is another interesting angle in this game. Bengals defense obviously has been totally disastrous. Didn't talk a ton about Isaiah Likely. I mean, it's sort of like lower volume Lamar Andrews where the matchup is legitimately perfect. And in a normal week, we'd probably have a 4.5 or a 5-point projection for Isaiah Likely, but it's against the Bengals. So he's actually projecting as one of the best values of the slate. We're at about 7.5 projected fantasy points for Isaiah Likely. You could maybe mix a DeAndre Hopkins into some Lamar lineups. I don't hate that. The problem is if Bateman's back, Hopkins' route share is really going to fall off a cliff. Obviously, he gives you nothing after the catch. You're really just hoping for a touchdown with a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. And then, assuming Bateman plays, it's going to be really hard to justify these 2 deep threat guys that, barely run any routes, Devontae Walker, Tylan Wallace. Maybe you could do that in the $5 milli because there's 600,000 entries, but that seems pretty thin. You're already getting a pretty significant ownership discount, I would think, on both Bateman and Hopkins. I'd be pretty surprised if Bateman was higher than like 8-9%. Hopkins probably won't be more than 3 or 4% owned. Scott, anything to add on these Ravens pass catchers?
No, I don't think so. You mentioned the shadow on Zay Flowers, right?
Yeah, I believe we have a DJ Turner shadow projected on Zay Flowers. Bengals have been really tough against opposing wide receiver ones. And yeah, I think Ryan already mentioned that we just have not seen much of a ceiling from Zay Flowers, especially if you exclude that week 1 game. He basically has not given you any tournament winning scores this year, but this is the Bengals defense. That said, the one strength of their defense is DJ Turner. Only other guys that I wanted to throw out here is I think if you're stacking up the Bengals, I would give some consideration to Justice Hill as a bringback if he ends up playing. If the Bengals get out to a decent lead here, Justice Hill will obviously run a lot of routes, catch plenty of passes, and he's always been very explosive as a pass catcher. He was top 6, if I remember correctly, among all running backs last year in yards after the catch per reception. And then regardless of if Justice Hill plays or not, I also think Keaton Mitchell is a little interesting for like Ravens onslaught stacks. If this team plays so well that the starters get pulled, Keaton Mitchell might rack up 6, 7, 8 carries in the fourth quarter, and it is a league best matchup for Keaton Mitchell. So I could totally see a 60-yard Keaton Mitchell touchdown sort of breaking things open at his 4,500 price tag. If Justice Hill ends up sitting, we can anticipate maybe a few more routes, an extra carry or so for Keaton Mitchell. But really, I just like that sort of blowout angle for Keaton Mitchell. If they pull Henry, it'll be largely Mitchell getting those carries. All right, let's move it on to the Cincinnati Bengals. They have the lowest implied team total on the slate, despite Joe Burrow returning here at just about 22 points. Ryan, I'm curious how you see this Bengals team, because I think, anyone who's stacking up Burrow, I've sort of said this a lot with a lot of these quarterbacks, but the default build is very clear. It's going to be Jamar Chase, and it's going to be Mike Gesicki. What are you seeing on the Cincinnati side of things?
Yeah, I mean, first I want to say that you had my favorite stat that I've read all week on Joe Burrow in the slate breakdown. He's averaged 23.2 DraftKings fantasy points per game as an underdog since 2022. That would rank first on this slate over the full season. He's the cheapest guy. Like that. That's pretty interesting. I want some Joe Burrow exposure. And I kind of do think that default stack with him is just correct, right? It's an amazing schematic matchup for Jamar Chase. Ravens play a lot of single high, a lot of cover 3. Chase has literally a 57% first read target share against cover 3 this year. That is 10% ahead of Puka Nacua, who's the next closest. So he's amazing coming back from suspension. Very hard to argue with. If you were going to argue with him, it would be, well, the Ravens also have kind of shut down opposing wide receiver ones this year. 7th fewest DraftKings fantasy points per game allowed to wide receiver ones, but the 12th most allowed to opposing wide receiver 2s. I kind of want to just view Mike Gesicki as the Bengals wide receiver 2 this week. That's certainly what we've seen from him in the past in games that T. Higgins misses. So yeah, I agree that he's a very strong play. But yeah, you can also, based on that sort of note, kind of rotate in the Andre Yoshivas, the Mitchell Tinsleys kind of the world here. You could triple Burrow and just pick one of them plus Chase plus Gesicki. You could leave Gesicki out of the stack and pivot to one of those actual wide receivers. So I think all of those are compelling angles. And yeah, I'm going to want a decent number of Burrow lineups just to kind of play all of those combinations.
Yeah, I think if we're debating between these two cheap punt options with Burrow, between Andre Yoshivas and Mitchell Tinsley, they're both solid. I imagine both clock in at single-digit ownership. I think Yoshivas will be a bit more popular on this slate, but Tinsley's the guy that I think has a bit more tournament winning upside here. 12.2 expected fantasy points, 69% route share last week. He's actually posted a higher targets per route run than T. Higgins this season. He was also at 2.75 yards per route run in the preseason, just 3,500 here. It looks like across the industry, we basically have the highest Mitchell Tinsley projection out there. I like that a lot. I think that's a really strong angle. I think Tinsley, with these cheap wide receivers, they're obviously competing against Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, as projected values. And Tinsley is one of those guys who I think could actually have a ceiling that, puts Mark Andrews or an Isaiah Likely out of your flex spot in some of these largest field contests. Only other guy that I wanted to note in terms of pass catchers here, Noah Fant only ran 15% of the routes last week. We have him projected for a bit more than that, but that's just something to keep in mind. Normally Fant's role has been 35 to 40% of routes. Barely played last week. I guess, if you're playing Joe Burrow a bunch in the Millie, you could mix in a Fant, you could mix in a Tanner Hudson, but I think some of these ancillary wide receivers in Yoshivas and Tinsley are probably my favorite place to go. And then Ryan obviously already noted, but Gesicki without Higgins is basically a mid-range wide receiver too, and he's only 3,100. So he's another one of those super cheap tight ends that, if you're punting at wide receiver, you're largely competing with those very, very cheap tight ends in your flex. Scott, anything to add on Bengals pass catchers before we talk Chase Brown?
Yeah, I just want to say Gesicki is a really, really good play. Potentially, I think you wrote it up as potentially just cheap T. Higgins without swag.
Yeah. Every time Mike Gesicki catches a pass, I think of that game like 4 years ago where he caught a touchdown and did the gritty, and it was the worst dance I've ever.
You're like my
seen in
friends
my
who
life.
won't let me live down my bad dancing at weddings. It
Oh,
was 6
those are
years
no
ago.
friends
Get
at all.
over it.
I think you can make fun of people's dancing at any occasion. Wedding, anything goes. I would never bring it up if you hit some terrible dance moves at my wedding, Scott. Chase Brown with Samaje Perine back. Workload is obviously going to take a hit. The good thing for Brown is that he was still earning, goal line attempts, red zone attempts. All those touches were going to him for the most part, even when Perine was playing. He's a fine play. Again, sort of comparable to a Josh Jacobs, a Javonte Williams in terms of raw projection. I do think you can mix him in pretty easily to Joe Burrow stacks because he'll get those checkdowns, a little bit more receiving volume to go around. Ryan, anything to add on Chase Brown?
I'd just say that his workload, at least recently over his last few games with Perine, was completely awful. Like he was not even like a top 24 running back, barely, by expected fantasy points per game. At the start of the season, he was still getting almost everything, with Perine just getting like a few kind of errant like third down snaps, pass blocking stuff. So it's possible that that's just what Perine's role is, at least in his first week back. I imagine they're also like happier with Chase Brown in terms of his rushing efficiency and how he's been playing over the last 6 weeks with Joe Flacco, like as opposed to how he was playing kind of in the Jake Browning era of the Bengals season. So maybe he just holds on to a higher like workload share than we would expect. But I mean, ultimately, like I think I still prefer like Jacobs to him. I just think it's too likely that he kind of gets squeezed out of it, at least some of these like important routes and receiving game touches.
Yeah, I think only other thing that I wanted to add on this backfield, Samaje Perine, 4K, sort of competing with like the Justice Hills, Keaton Mitchells of the world. I like both of those guys a little bit more than Perine, assuming they both play. That said, Perine's one viable game. He scored 17 points when the Bengals lost to the Jets. That game saw just under 80 points. So if you are stacking up this game really heavy, there is a chance that Perine pushes for like 35-40% of snaps, can maybe get some efficiency in there at just 4K. But that feels like a pretty thin angle. I think like a Keaton Mitchell getting the fourth quarter carries is probably a better Thanksgiving Day angle if both guys are going to be 2, 3, 4% owned on this slate. Don't think we have anything else to add here. Like I said at the top of the show, guys, always remember to late swap. Always keep an eye on sort of your combinations here. If you're going to play a quarterback with his two most popular wide receivers, either think of ways to get different elsewhere. Think of other guys that you can mix in that might be on the lower end of ownership. Some of these punt options that we've talked about. Ryan, you just reminded me we have a Black Friday sale going on. Scott, you're the CEO, so why don't you tell people about this Black Friday sale?
Yeah, for 24 hours only, you can get Fantasy Points Premium for $18, Fantasy Points Data for $20, or Fantasy Points All In for $40. That's not per week. That's not per month. That's active now until late March. So this is a great opportunity if you want to try us out. If you haven't tried us already, you just gotta camp outside Fantasy Points headquarters all night and then trample people in the morning. Black Friday, 24 hours only, extreme discounts on everything at fantasypoints.com.
Yeah, love that. Also got a question in chat about FanDuel. I know we didn't really talk about FanDuel. I'll just mention some guys that are slightly better FanDuel values. Lamar Jackson a little bit better on FanDuel. Chase Brown a bit better on FanDuel. Isaiah Pacheco notably better on FanDuel. Rashee Rice is a bit better. Let's see what else. George Pickens is a little bit better on FanDuel. And then Kelsey, much better on FanDuel. They did a little bit better of a job with tight end pricing. Jake Ferguson also more viable on FanDuel. But this is a really fun slate, guys. Hope everyone enjoys the holiday. Hope everyone enjoys the football. And we will see you all at the top of the leaderboards.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.